Zack Snyder's found a unique path to success. Audiences being split on his catalog of films, particularly following the highly controversial DC Snyderverse. Regardless of viewers' feelings on a particular film, they'll tend to agree on a director's talent. While there was a wide variety of people that didn't like the Avatar films, they could all still agree that Cameron had skill that he brought to the craft. Snyder's unique artistic approach has gained him numerous fans and opposition. His most loyal fans viewing his visionary accomplishments as being on par with acclaimed directors Christopher Nolan and James Cameron. Meanwhile, his detractors swear he's been overvalued, going so far as to claim he has no talent at all. Many go too far, Snyder's cinematic eye easily being one of the best in the business. But cinematic eye isn't everything, and shortcomings with his overall story direction and choices have been a hindrance to a number of his films. I've seen my fair share of Snyder's catalog, sharing great appreciation for his approach to Man of Steel and 300, and holding less regard for Sucker Punch and Batman v Superman. Even his more decent work, like Watchmen and Justice League, were enjoyable, but they were a far way off from ever being comparable to Nolan's biggest hits like The Dark Knight and Oppenheimer. But when backed by a cult that worships the very ground he walks and air he breathes, it's hard not to expect something extraordinary. Making a long story short, I am not a Zack Snyder fan, but I can recognize his talent and the passion he carries for his world, story, and characters. And as someone that can respect that dedication and passion, I wanted to give a fair shot to his newest project this holiday weekend, Rebel Moon. Before we jump in, I should give a fair bit of warning here. We're going to be discussing spoilers for the film, so if you haven't checked it out yet, hop on over to Netflix right now and come back in about 2 hours. The opening of the film sets the mood for what we're about to experience. The film reminiscent to old sci-fi films from the 70s and 80s, a fitting nod to Zack's Star Wars inspiration. It brings back the sort of whimsical fantasy brought about by A New Hope, the unbelievable presented in a way that makes you accept it for what it is. There's an innocence to it that pulls you in, and the script respects its world enough to avoid the typical modern-day deprecating humor seen in many modern-day sci-fis. Our very first flight off the planet of Velt gives the same animated feel of Luke's first flight off of Tatooine, and the opening shot of Korra in the fields, illuminated by the bright orange sun, calls back to our introduction to Luke in A New Hope. It's a fun stylized choice that provides a fun nod to Snyder's love of Star Wars and many of the different sci-fi films brought about by the 80s. Which may end up being Rebel Moon's biggest detriment is its pacing, which is at its worst at the very start of the film. The first 40 minutes spent in the village that the main character Korra and her companion Gunnar call home. It's a bit of a slow start, particularly the first 10 minutes, which does its best to introduce you to Korra, Gunnar, and the villagers before the arrival of the villain faction, the Motherworld. It was nice having a movie actually use some time to establish its setting and characters, as I feel a lot of movies end up foregoing this to introduce a big action piece within the first 2 to 3 minutes. None of this time is wasted, a lot of work being done to establish the universe and show us exactly how the Motherworld treats lesser settlements, and why they're a threat that needs to be dealt with. Korra herself is hard to get a read on here. The village helps us understand her thinking and motives, but we don't get exactly to see the why to her character. It's enough to root for her, but not enough to create that connection I needed to fully fit with the character. Gunnar, on the other hand, is mapped out fully. He's friendly and amendable, and was even optimistic that they could partner with the Motherworld upon their arrival. When no other villager had the courage to speak as the lead harvester, he stepped up to protect his fellow man, and his oversharing dealt a deadly blow to their village, a spot of guilt that drives him for the rest of the film. Gunnar's the emotional heart of the movie, serving as the audience's gateway into the world, as he's often learning it from Korra and the party. He has zero combat ability and is often viewed as a coward, despite proving more than once that he's ready to act when no one else will. He may not have the other's skill, but he's definitely got the strongest heart. In order for their journey to work, we need to get a feel for the place Korra and Gunnar see so important to protect, and that's what these 40 minutes do. However, there was probably a few minutes that could have been briefer, and having cut 5 or 6 minutes from the beginning could have provided some much needed time to the later half of the story. The village also put a lot of focus on 2 other characters, the robotic Motherworld servant Jimmy and the Motherworld private Eris, both characters helping shed some light on the inner workings of the Motherworld and how not all goes along as easily as it may seem. When shit hits the fan and Korra has to take action to save Sam, it's Eris and Jimmy that come to her aid, the trio taking out the platoon sent to oversee the villagers. Given the time spent on both, showcasing Aerith's beef with his commanding officers and Jimmy's own issues with honor following the death of the royal family, I thought it was pretty safe to assume the major players of our party were going to be Korra, Aerith, and Jimmy. Which is why I was shocked the pair remained behind when Korra and Gunnar leave. I highly doubt that's all they're meant for, and seeing as the end of the movie takes us right back to the village, it seems safe to suspect both will play a major role in part 2. But without their current involvement, it does feel like some of their scenes could have been cut down to focus on our main cast for part 1. Part 1 is a Gathering the Team movie. A little over an hour of the movie focused on Korra and Gunnar running planet to planet to gather a team of rebels willing to fight against the Mother World and defend the village. Much like Star Wars, it's right around now where the heavy sci-fi fantasy kicks in. Various alien races, worlds, and cool technologies being introduced, like these walking capture units and the molten blades that feel oddly similar to our beloved lightsabers. My only complaint to the world hopping was that there was little time to spend at each location, and Korra's journey brought her to environments that felt kinda samey. Most of the spaces we seemed to journey to being barren open lands, be it farm or desert, and the interesting environments give us very little time to actually enjoy and see them. It also didn't really help that some of the most impressive looking worlds were shown in the brief glimpses we got at our villain Noble, and we'll get a little bit more into him later. It kinda gave me the vibes of Rise of Skywalker. We were just bouncing location to location so fast, we got little sense of the planets and cultures. It felt better suited to a video game, but knowing Zack's love of Fortnite, maybe he can be convinced to look into a massive open world adaptation. As far as the actual gathering of the crew goes, there's not a whole lot to say. It's sort of your typical sequence of events. The heroes travel to a location, an event happens that puts them in proximity of their new team member, the new team member shows off their skills to Korra and us so that we can see what they bring to the team, and then it's on to the next one. Now, I know that may not sound all that exciting, but don't let my brief overview mislead you. This was actually the high point of the movie for me. The different characters were all likable, and it was fun seeing their skills in action. We understand the purpose each serves to the team, and it helps to paint the idea they'll all have something to fill by the conclusion of the massive story being told. And Zack does well to ensure every member of the party gets at least one major moment before rolling credits. I really do want to give a shout out though to one character, the Beast Tamer Tarek. I really can't tell you what it was, but this guy won me over almost immediately. The sequence where he tames the griffin-like creature and the mutual respect earned during the flight made me fall for him. Snyder built a deeply likable cast with this one. Unfortunately, I do think the massive amount of time spent in the village robbed us of some key scenes that could have deepened the relationships for our team. I'm sure a lot of this will be fixed in the director's cut, a decision that still sits kinda poorly with me. Honestly, with an extra 10 to 15 minutes, most of the complaints I have story-wise could have been fixed, and it sort of annoys me that Netflix may have hindered this just so that they can get their own Snyder cut. Zack really built something special with this one. The Motherworld serves as an interesting faction, especially when you get into its own rise and fall. About halfway through the movie, we start getting scenes between Korra and Gunnar that begins to shed some light into exactly who Korra is and what the Motherworld has done. The highly skilled farmer being revealed to be one of their former soldiers, and not just any soldier, one raised by one of its most vicious generals, Belsarius. Korra's backstory may be one of the most interesting parts of her. The mystery surrounding the assassination of the royal family and her sudden desertion is the major draw pulling me back to part 2. Her past ups and downs and clear suffering from what happened back then adding far more layers to the stoic badass warrior we're first introduced to. After gathering our team and getting an understanding as to who Korra actually is, it's time for the climactic final confrontation before the credits roll on part 1. And this is where problems start to arise once again. Kai plays a pretty big role upon meeting Korra and Gunnar in the Velt Bar, being the man that helps them find and gather their army. Outside of liking Charlie and the type of character that Kai was, that sort of smooth-talking smuggler that felt like a mix of Han Solo and Jack Sparrow, there wasn't a lot I could gather for the man himself. So when Kai suddenly comes to Korra about being a better man and being inspired by her to take up arms against the Motherworld and fight for a purpose, I anticipated something was about to go down. My initial thought being that Zack was laying the groundwork for Kai to make some sort of heroic sacrifice for the others to flee. And then it kept happening. On their way to the depot, at the depot, something just wasn't right. And soon it became clear Kai wasn't meant to die heroically, he was meant to betray the team. Something that became reality just a few minutes later. Of all characters screwed by the slow early and fast mid-stage pacing, Kai got it the worst. When the betrayal actually goes down, I felt nothing. I like Charlie, so knowing he was on his way out was a bit sad, but as for Kai himself, I just couldn't feel anything for him. His motives made sense, but it was clear from Korra's reaction that this was meant to feel like a much more personal betrayal than it actually came off as. There were few scenes to give the impression they were close, and Korra's an experienced soldier. It wouldn't make sense for her to trust Kai so easily, unlike if this was Rey from The Force Awakens. Personally, I wish this betrayal happened later, that they could have found another way to make this encounter go down. As it plays out, it feels forced, and I think the moment could have benefited by having Kai save them this time, only to betray them once they reach the village, giving more time for him to bond with Korra, Gunnar, and the team. Where Kai's lack of time in the spotlight kills his betrayal, another character with little screen time absolutely nails his big climactic exit. Darien Bloodaxe was gone about as quickly as he was introduced to us. We didn't get a lot of time with the character, but the big thing made clear to us is he has a strong sense of duty, so it was no surprise he took it upon himself to take out the gun and save his allies, even when he knew it meant his death. Between the writing and Rey's acting, the impact of the moment rings with the same emotional gravity as if Korra or Gunnar had made the same exact play. It's sad knowing we won't get to truly meet and understand this character, but it was a big moment, and one bound to stick with his allies and friends. After all this comes to pass, we finally reach the brutal confrontation between Korra and our villain Noble. I do wish we had a little bit more interaction between these two. Things felt deeply personal by the time they come to blows, but they have little interaction before then to help us understand why. Both are shown to be savage soldiers when pushed too far, so perhaps that's all this was, but I can't help but wonder if further flashbacks in Part 2 will unearth a yet unknown connection. Either way, it does help set up the grudge match these two will engage in, as the end of this film makes it clear that Korra's battle with the Motherworld Commander is far from over. I was kinda nervous going into Part 1 with how things would translate, but things felt concluded by the time the crew reaches the village. Yes, we know there's more to the story and a sequel on the way, but there's a satisfying resolution that doesn't feel like we've been left without some sense of closure, unlike what Across the Spider-Verse did to us this past June. What should come as no shock to anyone, Rebel Moon was a beautifully crafted film. The camera work is amazing and shots well thought out, leaving us with no shortage of moments like this one. Zack's always been a visionary, and Rebel Moon further proves this. Like most his films though, Snyder's got a weird obsession with slow-mo, and while some sequences truly benefit, others see it get in the way of the flow. Our best case in point coming from the final fight. Neither Korra nor Noble does anything extraordinary choreography-wise, but the fight feels real. It's fast, brutal, and above all, deadly. And any bit of slow-mo would have ruined that. I'm glad he kept it out at this moment, but it certainly would have helped if shots like these were a bit more sparing. Any film with the name Zack Snyder on it has been very hit or miss for me. Some have been compelling, and others have had me checking my watch every few minutes to see when this would all finally be over. But I loved Rebel Moon. I fell in love with the characters and world, and I'm eager to see where things go from here, particularly when it comes to Korra's past and the role she had to play during the assassination of the royal family. There's a good deal of mystery following the character of Princess Issa, and while we've been told by a few different characters what happened that day, and can assume a bit more based on Balsarius being revealed as our ultimate big bad, I can't help but feel that there's a key piece of this story missing. And now that Balsarius and Noble are on the hunt for Korra, and possibly more dangerous than ever, there's a lot to draw us back to the sequel. I can't say that this was the genre-redefining sci-fi film that the hardest of Snyder's diehard fans had promised. I don't exactly see Rebel Moon becoming the next Star Wars, but it's definitely worth checking out, and I'll surely be following the story further once Part 2 drops in April.